we made it back on. I'm hoping my guests can get back on as well. I'm looking at my registered attendees. So it looks like we've got about 12 people that have come back from our 60 that we had before. And it's all of my awesome folks that I totally love. Hi, Kara. Hi, Molly. Hi, John. Jack's here with us. Avi's my coworker. So I'm really excited to have Avi with us. So yay. So everybody jump in and start saying hi and asking questions. And so we have the ask a question piece down here on the bottom of your screen. So as we go through this, please feel free to ask questions of our guests, and I'll monitor this. So if any of you guys were with us on the last cast, you know that Toddi had major technical difficulties and was the silent host. And I have totally learned the value of amazing guests because they can just carry it all on their own and they didn't need me. So all good. We're going to continue because we were having such an amazing conversation before. So I'll just introduce this really quickly. In case anybody wasn't part of our last session, we are talking about competency modeling, job architecture, the value of this to the business. And so Rachel's got a lot of experience with that. And Erin actually is our expert in translating the completed models into technology. And so we're really eager to hear from her as well, because if any of you guys know me, I'm kind of a tech guru and I'm the LMS manager for my company. And so, we participated in this competency modeling project in my workplace. And I'm thinking, all right, now how does that translate into the LMS? And then, and so in our last conversation, we were talking about career advancement and how to really engage folks in kind of self-directing their own career advancement, and the platform can help with that. So anyway, I'm really eager to turn it back over to my ladies because we had the best conversation. Let's just rock on.
Yeah, so is there a specific, there's lots of ways that I could sort of talk about getting it into the learning management system. Is there a specific space that you'd like us to sort of start in that, or?
Well, one of the areas that I think is really interesting is, first of all, how do we build out career paths for people within the LMS that aren't just about acknowledging skill sets or just, going through videos and saying, hey, I've completed this. Because I think we all see things, like on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has amazing content. Pardon me, by the way, it's Jack Russell. They have amazing content, and they offer certifications online when you've completed content. Some of them have, inline assessments, to be able to demonstrate that you've actually understood the information that you get. But how can we take the competency modeling to be able to line out career paths and career progression for people and translate that into technology in a way that's engaging so that they know that they can go and kind of self-direct?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk about that first from an administrator's perspective, and then I'll sort of swing that around maybe and talk a little bit about what the end user will experience. And I'm going to start with administrators because that's usually where the people that I work with and the people who are setting up the framework. So again, sort of going back to the technology that we use, because it's an enterprise learning management system, and it has this HR component that has competencies in it. It also has the ability to set apart other hierarchies within the system. So we're looking at the language they would use would be organizations and positions. So you could set up an organization like a department and a position like these roles that we're talking about. And so there's all these different components that come together. So we've got our competency framework resides here, and that's a nested option if you want. And then you've got these position and organization frameworks. What that means is that I can, once I set up my competency framework, I can say, because we were talking earlier about, say, overall or leadership or core competencies. So this is something that everyone in the company needs when they onboard. Or maybe annually, we need you to have this. And so we can set up a competency that's all in, everybody has to take this. And the technology also has the ability to set up a certification in the sense that if it is something that you need to revisit every year, then all of the notifications will go out and say, hey, everybody in the company, please come back and do this video, or we've updated it and we need you to do this. Then you can also target these positions. So I'm setting this up in my technology so I can say everybody who's in marketing needs to take these courses. And so once you set that up, you can, in your learning plan, you can say, assign this learning plan, assign the competencies to the people in the position to this learning plan. So if I assign that learning plan to everybody in marketing, they're just going to get all the competencies that are assigned to that position or the organization. So there's lots of different, it's a big build at the beginning, but again, the idea is that if you're working with like thousands of people in a structure, which is what these people often are, we're also automating that structure as well, which makes a lot of people happy when it's automated, right? Because you're taking a lot of manual labor off of their hands. Now, that's the administrator's dream, right? To make it easy for myself. And then the end user has a different kind of experience. So the end user can come in and they don't have to look at, like if I'm in marketing, I don't have to look at SysOps trainings because that doesn't mean anything to me and I don't want to see it. So I might even have my own dashboard that might highlight something that's new. Say, hey, we've got this new course on conflict management, because I like that too. So I'm just going to pick up Rachel's space there. So, one of the new sort of updates for this technology allows you to have these sort of banners. And so I log into the LMS and I can say, oh, new course on conflict management, take this and get your badge or your micro credential or all these sort of ideas and that, click into it. And I take that. And again, that's one of those things that you can set up with our technology. It could be a video, it could be a quiz, it could also be, so they have a seminar type structure, which is almost event planning. And so what you could do is create that face-to-face component to it, which, as we were saying, a lot of this would be sort of in the field or offline is a way of managing it. And so they could see that there. And then what you could do is then have your assessor or your manager, whoever who needs to do that, come in and then check off what you've done. And then you would have a record of that through your record of learning. So you're always, there's nothing ever hidden from you as the learner, and there's nothing ever hidden from either the administrator or the manager. It's all very clear how it's set up. And so the communication is there.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I
might just add one more thing to that, and then because it's sort of all these ideas. I think also to speak to that, because I think one of the questions that Toddi was asking is sort of like that user experience and how do we set that up? And this idea of a lot of the clients that I've worked with do have different structures, and so they'll have those management driven or technical role driven competencies that you sometimes actually have to complete that training before you get on the floor. And then there'll be more of the career development items that might be more of I'm reaching up and grabbing that training and moving forward with it. And so the technology allows for however you want to make that happen. And quite often what I see, which I like too, is that they'll have an idea. Client will have an idea when they come in, see what the technology and goes, that's actually a really good idea. And they change their plans because they didn't think that could be a thing. And that actually opens up the program for them a little bit, which that's always my favorite kind of day at work. When the technology inspires growth back. So
totally. And that's actually a good segue, because I was also thinking about that end user experience and where everything aligns. Because one of the things that we've done as we've started building our learning framework, I guess, is that, there are certain pieces, to your point, Erin, that are functional and kind of not, they're mandatory. I'll just say it, right? You got to take this if you want to, stay in this role and be successful in this role. These are the courses you take. But then we've also built in this additional layer above that is more for that the person who thinks like, what competencies would I need to be successful in this department? What do they do in this department? How does the competencies that I'm already good at translate to a role in these other departments? So kind of giving them that autonomy to use it as they wish. So maybe I already know I want to go here. I'm just going to take all the courses for that. I'm going to get my micro certification, my badges, all that stuff, and be ready, when the time comes, that I can be the shining star. And others, maybe I just want to know a little bit. What do they do? What do they do? What do they do? So really being able to give that autonomy to the learner, and I think we all recognize that if you think about even just when you went to, if you go to college, you've got your required courses and you've got your electives. It's the same thing, really being able to architect your learning path, or from our end, architecting or engineering learning paths that are broad enough or clear enough for people to know, okay, these are my must-haves and these are now it's open for me. Yeah. And then also to speak that the reporting piece and the way that we're assessing is really important to me as well. And so technologically speaking, there have been so many new advancements and different ways of doing things recently that have really affected how we are developing our content and our programming, to the point where, for certain competencies, there are now technological pieces where you can give them a scenario and they can record their response and send that back for someone to, what I mean? So things like that, where it isn't just, can you answer questions on a test? That it's not that is not one valuable way to assess people. It's clearly not the only way. And when it comes to things like conflict management, things like influencing up, oftentimes, if I'm giving you a multiple choice or a fill-in, that doesn't necessarily tell me that you actually know how to do it. There's so many times where you can know the textbook definition, what the right answer is, but it doesn't mean if you had to actually say that out loud or do that, with someone on the phone or whatever it is, that you can do that. So knowing and doing really are two different things, and I think that that's where our assessment has to get strong, is being able to show the doing, because that's where we'll bring the value to the business to say, okay, it's not just that they took a test. I actually heard them explain this concept the way they would explain it to a customer or whatever it is. And it was really good, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I might add, go ahead. I was going to say
observation checklist, which is kind of the same concept. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I like that, because there's so many different ways, and I saw that as a question that came up in the first session, how do you assess? And I think that often sort of depends on what the skill is and what the organization looks like and what the staffing is to get you to do that. But one of the clients that I work with is industry and safety, and basically if you pick up a chainsaw, you have to take this kind of thing. Is chainsaw safety, right? That's really important. So they went through and created a really complex competency models, but on top of that, they created a train the trainer and train the assessor program as well, so that as they're building up this session for the learners, they also built on top of that, and it was often a progressive. So if I went here, then I can also become an assessor. And so now that I know that all my assessors are standardized to go along with this standardized set. And that's important because what does assessment look like? If you leave that sometimes up to, and this is again, is an organizational conversation that's a little bit outside of the L&D product, but it's part of the package, is are we aligned on assessment? Because one of the things that they were talking about, the client was, just really honest. They're just there's favoritism, or there's bias in these kinds of things. And if we want to have standardization, which is a big part of competency training, is to have standardized assessment as well. And so they actually ran their assessors through, they built a program and ran them through a competency training program to become assessors so that they could assess the employees on their competencies. I hope that makes sense.
I think that the observation and checklist piece is really key too, because then we're looking at not just, what does this competency look like? Or what, someone who's good at conflict management can do X, Y, and Z, but how does that fit within what we want for our mode of success? And so I think here, if where Eric's talking about strict clinical procedures, that's obviously different than, something maybe a touch fuzzier like influencing up or those types of things. But one of the mantras that I had to start repeating over and over again, which is what you do with a mantra, when I got here, was really that idea that that this is workplace learning. Like yes, it's cool to learn, like healthcare is cool. It's cool to learn about it. I love knowing these things. But that actually is not what we're here to do. We're not learning for fun. Like when you go to a university and you're just trying to figure things out, you're here to do a specific job. And the training that we're giving you is preparing you with the right skills, focusing on the right competencies to do that job. And so everything that we do in that learning space and learning world needs to really connect back to, how do I do this at my job? And I think assessments have to match that. But I like that idea of the observation and checklist for competencies as well, because then it's not just a generic, like, do you recognize conflict? Do you have a good attitude about it? But it is specific to what we're trying to drive for success here in your role, as well as then being able to know, okay, what does this competency look like then for the next role that I want to get to? If I want to get there, I understand that conflict management is important, but where do I need to go from here to get to that next space? That specific competency.
Right. And I think that's something like, again, sort of in the technology perspective, like our technology allows you to build your own scales and attach different types of, description to those scales. So a competency framework is attached to a scale. So you could have multiple frameworks with multiple different scales. And I've seen that in sort of very large organizations where they have very different teams doing different things, or the leadership versus technical sort of, or core versus technical. They might just want to assess that differently. So you can set up a different type of scale, whether that's competent with supervision, or not competent. So that's sort of the default to language that suits that HR or that organization. And that allows that to happen. And then that also that idea of being able to upload evidence. And so I think, Rachel, you were saying earlier, like take a picture, take a video. So again, like if I'm using a chainsaw, which I don't know how to use, but if I was using a chainsaw, like that's not something I could do in the office with a computer, right? That's something I'm outside, but I can use my phone or get somebody else to video how I do the particular technique, and then I can upload that, and then that could be tied as evidence and say, look, he did X, Y, and Z perfectly, therefore is competent. And that becomes part of the larger record of learning. And that is what technology allows us to do these days. It's so much easier to have images, have video, and have that as evidence.
I love using the word evidence too. I think that's really great. Like, I'm not just assessing you to see where you fall, but like we're showing evidence that yes, I can master this competency, or I hit the proficiency level where you need me to be. I like that.
Yeah, and I think something for the fuzzier areas, because I like that too, is I was doing a session earlier this year on adaptive learning, and this idea of using a different type of activity within the LMS that allows you to branch. And that means, like I work in technology, so we've got a support team, and we're always like on the phone talking to clients. And so you could walk a new person through different scenarios. So client asked this and your answer is X. And then you've got 3 choices, and then you start to follow a story. And then that whole piece can be also part of either the evidence or the conversation. And so at the end of the day, you can look at the results of this and go, no, I need to do some more training with this person. So that could be part of the course that leads them to a competency, that leads them to the conversation. So I might set up a course that says, here's some training, here's an adaptive exercise, so I can see, where you're hitting it. And then I'm going to set up an appointment with you to discuss that. And then we're going to maybe loop back or continue. And now we've got deeper learning in that. And I like that because the adaptive piece of it gives them the choice to make mistakes. And the idea of writing good at adaptive learning, again, another sort of larger piece to build, but it's about variations of incorrectness. So it's not black and white like you often see in sort of like, check the box kind of things. It's like, ooh, that could be right. Or that's pretty, they all look right. So you have to make a decision, because life is like that. We're making multiple mini decisions as we go along. And so in the softer, fuzzier skills, can you self-correct out of that? Or did you make the wrong decision from the beginning? And like, where do you go from there? And I think that's a really nice tool in the build of the automation of a competency that can lead you to a space of having a good conversation or a good assessment. And that's something that's built into the technology, and that I'm seeing more and more people in sort of e-learning building branching scenarios, because it provides this choice. And we're going back to that idea of, we want employees to think by themselves and make those decisions. And so we can set them up. The multiple choice exam is great, fast, easy, but it doesn't necessarily get into the deeper decision making and the continuous decision making process, whereas adaptive learning might get you there.
And to pile on to that is, realistic consequences. So
Yes.
you made a choice, maybe you made an okay choice, or there's a great choice, there's a bad choice, but what happens from here? And to your point, as we're branching out, okay, now you made an okay choice. Here's the consequence of that. Now what? How does that have this effect? And that's, to me, the branching scenarios are really, that's the true value of them, is to be able to take it down the line, to say, okay, well then what would happen? Well, then what would happen? And so, because I have seen a lot of branching scenarios where, someone picks an answer and it's kind of like, nope, that, you didn't answer their question, try again. It's like, okay, but what if that is what I had said? Like, what would I expect on the other side? Where is my learning opportunity? How do I know where I'm going to get better, where I'm missing this piece of the competency, whatever it is? How am I going to know that if I don't have that structured feedback? So to me, that's one of the most important things. I love branching scenarios, absolutely love them. And I think learners tend to really enjoy them too, as long as they prove that kind of real world value of what they're experiencing. Yeah.
The consequence is everything. So if you get into that and you're like, the client hangs up angrily, you're like, oh boy, better go back to the beginning and try that again. And then that's direct learning, I think, it's like low risk direct learning for the learner, because they're like, oh boy, that really stung, but I'm still learning, so I'm okay. I'm just in an exercise.
Absolutely. I really like what Jonathan is talking about here too, this idea of uploading something and the assessor watching it and commenting on what they observe. We're just getting started with stuff like that, both video and even just like giving a scenario. And for example, we have a messaging component to the business. So having, saying, okay, here's what someone messaged in, what would you message back? And being able within the technology to comment specifically. So, in being able to highlight and say, like, have you thought about the implications of this word? Or, like, do you think that this makes sense the way that we've talked about it, whatever it is, but being able to really pinpoint in that moment what it is. I definitely understand privacy nightmare for sure. I work in healthcare right now, so I absolutely understand that concept, and I'm always trying to find creative ways around it, to ultimately get to a point where, like, we can distill the activity and the assessment and the feedback to the ultimate goal, to the ultimate success. What are those competencies that we're really trying to drive here, and make incremental movement on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that you guys have taken this to a different, like a deeper level of conversation with respect to technology, which is, really the instructional design piece of this. And I actually have participated in doing instructional design pieces in the past where we were really focused on creating emotional intelligence with respect to sales teams, folks that are dealing with customers on a daily basis. And rather than doing a branching scenario, we did present like kind of a scenario at the beginning, and then we had like a devil on the shoulder type of thing with the rollovers, where you would start to select the answer, and as you rolled over that hotspot, it would say yes, but is that the exact best answer? Is that the best solution? And again, like you'd have four different possible answers, and maybe none of them were exactly right, but we had the instructional design piece of that developed so that we were really kind of promoting that whole emotional intelligence to really think it through. So, I mean, and it's like, I didn't realize at the time that I was doing that type of thing, but I really, it's exciting to hear you talk about this and the translation of competency that way. And I have to tell Jack Russell to stop.
Yeah.
He's very spoiled. This is why I was in the other spot to begin with.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But now, the enablement of, that type of situation where you can really prompt someone to start thinking and interacting even with a piece of software on an LMS is great. I mean, and that I'm just super excited. So I'll let you go on with that. We have a couple questions in here too. Kara's been posting a couple cool ones in here. Kara says, it's been my experience that not every competency equals training. And I think that's really super true. How do you make that determination and communicate it to stakeholders? Because obviously the stakeholders are helping us determine like what that learning path is going to look like for every competency. So I'll let you guys answer that.
That's a good question because, in my mind, it's going back to the top goals and the top success measures in that moment for the business. Because, I could probably map out 50 things, that we need and whatnot. Additionally, I think that I agree that not every competency needs here's our conflict management course, and here's our influencer course, and here's our communicating with stakeholders course. So totally agree that it's not necessarily like a one-to-one all of the time. But I would say that if it's a competency that we're targeting and that we're saying is important, I would have like sprinklings of this within, it's very rare in my mind. I try to keep it very rare where one course is literally just like only that, because I really like to push scaffolding. And I think that with learning paths, you can do that, right? Like you can, the beginning courses will just be focused on that. But then as you get into those higher level things, it's so rare that, my conflict management won't also have to do with like word choice or tone or, de-escalation techniques, whatever it is, that there are different pieces that kind of fit through there. And so for me, Kara, in this context, scaffolding is thinking about the way that we introduce and supplement content so that, I want to get you up here. The end result is that you've got, these 5 competencies and you're strong in them. So I'm going to pick maybe the most important one, maybe the most difficult one, maybe the easiest one, depending on the way that I'm structuring my program. I'm going to pick something that we can really anchor onto and start with. But then as we're moving through that learning path, we're just kind of throwing in, little pieces here and there from other stuff, so that by the time I get to the top, it's not even necessarily clear, like, oh, wow, I was on a step ladder the whole time, moving up, up, up. I thought I was just going straight, but I was actually, these pieces were getting built in. And it's something from an instructional design standpoint that I've had to push home with my team, who right now is not super strong with instructional design, best practices and principles. And so talking about the fact that, like, if you have you have this, this is a day 3 activity we're doing. Like, yes, the biggest focus on assessment and all of this should be this content, but throw in a piece of the scenario from what we talked about yesterday. Throw in these things so that you can start thinking about them. Even sometimes throw in something we're going to see in the future. They may look at it now and say, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But then when we're there tomorrow, we say, hey, remember yesterday when so-and-so, whatever, So to me, scaffolding is really just the building blocks, within the instructional design and within the program itself, that just provide a very easy, as long as you're, doesn't mean the work is easy, but an easy path to follow to move yourself upward with your knowledge or your skills. I don't think that's too earth-shattering. I think it's pretty common.
And I think in relationship to that, breaking down the competency framework, and I was saying earlier, like you might have a parent competency that has children competencies, it's hard to break tasks down sometimes. And someone introduced the word Smallify to me a while ago, and I thought that was a really good word, because sometimes if you're looking at kind of a big skill that has to be taken on, I think of sort of scaffolding as just like, if they're absolutely not competent in that at all, then we have to go down to the sort of to smallify it and start somewhere. And that's where I see a lot of people building in scales into their competency framework that might actually have 5 levels in it instead of sort of a 3 level, like competent, not competent, competent with supervision, but scales, because they know that that's a very difficult skill, and that between now and 6 months or a year, it allows you to build those sort of smart goals around it. It's just like, okay, in 6 months when we have our review, I'd like to move you up 2 in that scale. And then we'll look at that, and then we can add some more training on the field work or whatever it is to make that happen. And then in another 6 months, we can move you up another 2 on that scale. So it's not all things are sort of black and white. And that's the thing with competencies, is that it's not like you did it once right, but can you do it 5 times on your own correctly? This is something that we're building into the movement, which is why I think that competency training, the focus on competency, is very concrete, long-term lasting knowledge that the person learns, other than just going through a video and a multiple choice quiz, which is, standard learning, but it doesn't always get into the body. And so the more that you do it, and the longer term vision it is. And so the scaffolding could also be that, is where you're starting at a lower level and you're just adding more material so that you can get into that parent competency, and then you can start again. And as Rachel was saying, I like this idea, is that while you're building this, they're also rarely like perfectly siloed. So while I'm getting better at this competency, I'm also getting better at these other 3 competencies, and I'm lifting the whole piece up a little bit. And I see that pretty regularly.
Yeah, thank you. And so to speak to ID making competency, I think, now I got to read.
Yeah.
So yes, ultimately, so if I said ID is what makes competency, I apologize. That is not what I meant. It was really more actually around what Erin was just saying in terms of the evaluation piece of it, of designing the content in such a way that you're allowing people to show their success of mastering that competency. So I think that, basically, yes, I think to what Toddi's saying, that focusing on how the instructional design framework aligns to building and measuring those competencies, because really, if measuring it is what we're really looking for here, right? Because that's the ultimate, is just where are you? If I'm expecting you at the level you're at right now, if I'm expecting you're proficient in this competency, how do I know that that's true? How do you show it to me? And if not, what do I do to get you there? Are you in the right place?
Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, so a lot of folks on here know that I used to be an old Army trainer. So, in the Army with, the TRADOC standards that they use, everything is built on, the enabling learning objective, which might be starting out at turning on something, pushing the on button and getting something powered up, all the way up to being able to, manipulate a hand controller, to be able to, type a command in a keyboard and get a response and ping back, building up to, that terminal learning objective. And this goes back to literally, instructional design and adult learning 101, but building on that, but then taking that framework of demonstration of, not even just necessarily competencies, but just skills that someone should perform to be able to do that final thing. Mm-hmm. And that translates, kind of in a practical fashion. And I remember I used to work with a lot of Boeing PhDs in instructional design. It's kind of it's where I got a lot of my learning from, was working with them. And somebody explained it to me once, and they said, how do you make a cake? And so they went through the whole steps of, basically learning how to separate an egg, how to do the stirring. I mean, and we, we broke everything down. And it's like after, this was in the way back, when I first started into this field, it's like, oh, I get it now, and so I can certainly see how the frameworks that we build for instructional design or in curriculums, that translate maybe into our electronic deliveries, you're very closely aligned to how we're building out our competencies and looking for the pieces that we're building on. So, but all cool stuff. So this is really fun topic, actually. We're all geeky.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. Super cool. So it is interesting. So Erin, I know you do a lot of work with translating, competency modeling and job architectures into like learning management systems. I will tell you, in my own organization, I think we dropped off the call. Avi Sofera was on here before. Avi has done like this freaking amazing job in working with our engineering working groups, our stakeholders, to build out core competencies for the engineering groups, really starting with basically writing requirements, looking at things like risk analysis, the things that have been outlined by, the management in our annual plans about what they want to see for core competencies for the, engineers across all of our product lines. And he's done just a tremendous job. We roll this stuff out and we do a lot of reporting on that, like where people are in terms of completion of the units, if they've taken the instructor-led courses, where they are, if they're on track. The challenge that we actually really face, and this really super like along with the core competencies and job architecture question, is our particular piece of software that we use for our LMS does not allow us to build in very finite details on competencies or job architecture. We have things like job families.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how do you get around some of the technology blockers that are out there? Erin, any thoughts on that? Because like it just makes it mind-numbing some days.
Yeah, and that's something that, as I was saying at the beginning, is when you're planning, if this is something that you're starting, know what you have in-house before you get going, and understand that a lot of technologies do a lot of great things, but none of them do everything kind of thing. In that sense, that to know that, and the idea of, being a technologist and understanding, like I said earlier, some technologies are open source and you can work with, the provider or vendor to build out further features for that. And some of them might be proprietary, in which case you're probably in the box and you may have to either add other technologies into your stack, and then you have to think about integrating them. So the technology conversation is a huge part of the pre-planning of this whole item. Yeah, because all the technologies are different.
Entire job breakdown structure, which I actually can only get into my LMS by loading it up in a CSV. And the way that our systems talk to each other right now, and I think this is true for a lot of people, they don't always speak to each other the way they should. The connectors don't always work, the API calls don't always work the way they're supposed to. And so you end up doing a lot of really manual tasks, to make these things as robust as they could possibly be. And I wonder sometimes, I'm like, okay, this is 2019, like why can't this be a little more integrated or a little easier to, basically say, okay, this is our really cool job architecture that we put together over here, and the competencies that make up every single job role, including, maybe even data like on salary and, like the expected growth. I mean, we could do all kinds of forecasting and these things, and then translating that to our technology so that, like, not even just our LMSs, but our HRISs and our talent acquisition software and stuff has, like that insight into, okay, well, this is, the number of folks that we're going to be meeting that require this core competency. Maybe there's some automation that can happen around that. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, no, that just isn't there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I always keep going back to this planning piece, because I think that I see people sort of get into halfway through and they have these really great ideas, and I agree with them, but the technology that we provide may not reach that space. I think the one that we do is quite robust, but it's not, as I said earlier, it has HR components, but it's not an HR system. And so people who are going to use an enterprise learning management system probably already have an HR system as well. Mm-hmm. And so then it becomes do they talk to each other? Maybe, maybe not. But then can we pull that data down? And then you're starting to work with data analysts who can like pull it together and then and have that out. So our reporting solution sort of follows with the learning management system, which is why I try to get my clients to try and use that as much as possible, because you can get a lot out there, but it's not currently tapping into other systems, which is ideal. That's that we might be reaching into that situation, but yeah.
It's a good call out.
Oh yeah. So I'm hearing people are involved in this.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a good call out. That preparation piece and knowing your technology, because either it's going to tell you need different technology, or it's going to tell you what your parameters are, because it can be incredibly demotivating to do all of this exciting work and then realize, oh my gosh, we could have something so amazing and it's not going to happen because we can't leverage what we have right now to make it happen. And I've been in that situation before. It's really difficult, and it's hard to keep everybody else motivated then to keep moving forward when they feel like they've seen, how amazing something could be, and then we can't do that. So totally agree with the planning. Either do you have the ability to find what will meet your needs? If not, then how can you work within what you have?
And related to the technology in-house is the people that are using the technology. And so this is something else. So I was saying, getting your competency consultant and your technology consultant. But if you do kind of a SWOT analysis or something like that at the beginning in your planning, you're like, do I have the human resources on my team to build, manage, maintain my competency framework? And I really want to encourage people to think about that as they move in, because like I said, it's a long view project, it's a worthwhile project, but it requires resources. And for this to succeed, we need to have the right people in there working on it. And I find that a lot of people that I work with who are learning management, administrators, either they're subject matter experts in that field, but maybe not technologists. They might be a competency expert or HR person, but they're not a tech. So there's quite often one piece missing. And so that's actually something that you have to think about, is lifting up, is this person capable of managing this technology too? So those are part of the plan as you get going, and then you can learn those skills. I obviously don't think it's difficult, because that's my day-to-day job, but it's not easy for people who are coming in from a completely different space, and it requires training to make them sort of up and running themselves with the competencies to run a competency program.
Right.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because as I'm watching my own organization go through this, I think that's a very valuable lesson that we have learned, is that we need to be staffed up in order to support this work.
Yeah.
We're in that process right now, and I'm excited to see it, because I think that, we're going to make more progress now that we have the right people on the team. But boy,
aligned.
it's you tend to see this. And coming into this, it wasn't my native area by any means, and I've really just been trying to learn more about it. But, understanding how this touches LNG, how it touches HR, how it touches acquisition for talent, and, how that gets rolled out, and, who supports it, and the messaging that goes up and down. And it's I had no clue how incredibly complex this is. We could be speaking about this for weeks.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so very cool. I'm just going to look and see if we have any other questions in the question queue.
I'm just enjoying Pointy Clicky Fun. That's going to be my new phrase.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of Pointy Clicky Fun.
So yeah, that's this one thing about this group, by the way. We have some isms.
Love it.
Probably some TLDC isms. But they're a fun group, and people in the chat today are super engaged, which is really awesome, because occasionally we get diversions into Star Wars topics and things like that, which is fun too. It's been a really great camaraderie of folks, and so that's, to me, that's the real value of the group that we have here. And as we're talking about this, we're coming up on 5-minute mark. I would love to have you guys come back and speak more about this, because I think we could just keep going.
Well, and what I really like is that it is an organic conversation. We definitely have the points that we want to hit, and we've got a general idea of where we're going. But there have been so many great comments that have kind of, sent us out in different directions and questions that I just really like that organic conversation. So it's good to have a group that's invested and interested and knowledgeable to know, how to interact that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just looking at one of Jack's comments in here too about, assessing frontline workers versus knowledge workers. I mean, there's a topic we could dive into that would take a couple hours as well. And looking at the core competencies for delineating, what a frontline worker who, in her case, is saving lives. How do we determine what they actually need to know or need to be able to demonstrate? And again, it's that same thing of not knowing and doing might be two different things. And how do we make those assessments and really dive into maybe taking an example of someone who's a frontline worker versus a knowledge worker, and how do we determine what they really need to know? To me, that's the dark art that Kara was talking about earlier.
That assessment piece too, yeah.
Exactly. So super cool. So anything else, you guys? I'm sitting here chatting, but I'm loving hearing what you have to say. Any final thoughts on this before we sign off?
My final thought would just be that there are always trends, right? And that in business and L&D and all of these different things. And I think that this is, like I said at the beginning, competency models aren't new. It's not like it's a 2010s thing. But I think the value that it brings and just the connection that it brings to the organization and the business success model is really key. And that's, I think, where people are figuring it out now. And so I love that there are so many different businesses and so many different people within the community just kind of all wrestling with the same issues. Maybe the business looks different, maybe the workforce looks different, but at its core, it's still, how do we know what makes a person successful? How do we know it's going to drive the business forward, that drive the people forward, continue to develop and make it a place where not only do we get really good work done, but we have people who really enjoy doing the work and want to continue along a path with us.
That's a key point, to develop people. I mean, that's maybe one of the things we need to think about too. How do we use these models to develop people as they, either are fit to do the work or have a desire to do the work?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand for me, the business benefit and the personal.
And I think that also brings L&D sort of back into the organization. And I think sometimes L&D kind of floats and people are like, what are you guys doing over there? I think that often happens, right? And they kind of can float away. They're like, I want to build this because they love doing what they're doing. But the competency, as I was saying earlier, this is a backbone for your organization. And so when you got L&D tapped into that and HR tapped into that, you're all sort of coming off of these core competencies. And that makes what L&D doing, if that's a strong connection, more meaningful. And I think L&D supports the competencies. And the competencies are belong to the organization, not to L&D. L&D's work supports that to do what Rachel is saying, is build the organization and the people who work there to push the business goals forward. That's where it all comes down to. So it's got business value and it's got value for the employees. And it's a really great model to work on. But I think people are a little bit nervous at the beginning because it's work. it's a project and it should be managed as such. But I think that it brings so much more value to sometimes a little bit boring compliance training kind of thing. Oh, really? Do I have to do this again? And I'm an L&D. That's what I do. But the competency brings it back to the employee and makes it personal and takes something with them.
Yeah, it's not just what can I do for the business, it's how am I benefiting from this as well. We're so, I think our interpersonal and business and all of that is just so intertwined at this point that, going to work, I absolutely want to have a really strong impact on the business, but I also kind of want to use it as a way to make myself a better person too.
Yeah.
And it's not mutually exclusive. It can absolutely work in tandem.
I'm always kind of jealous when I see what the engineers get to do as part of their core competencies. My own organization, I think, has done a really good job of translating the goals of the business through their annual planning down to what we actually do in L&D. So,
nice.
Thumbs up to them for sure. The whole of the conversation. So I guess we're at the top of the hour. This has been super fun, and I just, it's like we could talk forever on this. So, but please consider coming back. The other thing too is put your contact information, if you would, in the chat box so that folks know how to reach out to you. I don't know how much consulting you might do in this area, but that's totally fair to put that out there and say people can contact you. So the big part of what we do in TLDC is we make a lot of good referrals to each other. And if you're not part of our Slack channel, I can send you the links on that too. Our Slack channel is a space where we have multiple channels where we can reach out to others and ask for help, post jobs, and like all kinds of cool stuff.
Wonderful.
I would love to be. Yeah.
Yeah, same.
Because we really would love to have you engage some more and keep the conversation going. So
Yeah.
super. Well, I'll go ahead and sign off. And it's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. I'm finally glad I got my sound back and actually haven't dropped off once. Yay.
Yay.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye. Thank you.